brewhoop.com. It's not wrong to love our stuff. Seriously. Post-game breakdowns, alright? So guess what? This is the verse to liven you up and get you ready, because it's Brew Hoop talking the Bucks. The Mike Dunleavy fan club started with us, trusting the two-man revolution too. Yep. You see, we tell you what's what and what's nothing but luck. Not fans of bad D or undisciplined Chucks. Don't get stuck spilling or muttering anything other than what Steve and Frank Madden come to pour in your cup. We're not the best thing to look at, but that's how it goes. I'll apologize now and just start the show. Those are our faces. Be nice. Let's go!
Brew Hoop podcast, Brew Hoop video cast? Brew Hoop Google Hangout is live. We have Frank Madden, we have Jake McCormick, we have Dan Sinclair. I'm Steve Von Horn, so we're all with you today. We're discussing first half, kind of digesting what happened in the first 51 games. Bucks are 26-25 in the eighth seed of the Eastern Conference, well ahead of the ninth place 76ers, but still behind the Rajon Rondo-less Boston Celtics and all the other teams that are pretty solid in the Eastern Conference. So, not everybody's all that happy. We're waiting on the trade deadline on February 21st at 2 p.m. We've heard a lot of rumors. Brandon Jennings, Monte Ellis, Samuel Dalembert, just about anything not tied down to the Bucks has been named in a rumor of some sort, but we don't have anything concrete to go on, and no deals have been made thus far. So, before we get around to kind of what we think could happen in the second half and how we think things could change before the trade deadline passes, I'm going to break down what we think of the first half of the season. I'm going to kick it to Frank first, and he's going to offer his thoughts, and we'll go down the line kind of taking different angles. So, Frank, why don't you ruminate and give us a little bit on what you think happened in the first half.
Well, I think record-wise, if you said they'd be 26-25, I don't think any of us would be extremely disappointed given where we thought they were at the beginning of the year. I think everybody on this panel thought they were probably, I think I said 40 wins. Steve, I think you may have said 42, Dan 43 or something like that. So, again, nothing really divergent from expectation. But I think really what we're looking at and we're seeing in terms of all this disenchantment with the team right now, I think so much of it goes back to the fact that we're okay with being an okay, decent 8-seed team, or many of us will at least sort of tolerate or can talk ourselves into accepting it if we think that they're building blocks here to be much better than that. I think with all that, it has always started for the last few years with Brandon Jennings, and especially when Brandon went into that tail slide 6-7 games ago, the month turned to February and he immediately started playing like he always does in February, which is awful. Even with the fact that Larry Sanders, who's honestly been the Bucks' best player, even with him out, the fact that they go on to lose 4 straight games, they kind of scrape one out here right before the break, but I think Jennings' struggles, I think, is really what I would say is sort of at the core of a lot of people, a lot of the existential angst in Bucks Nation right now. And I think there's now everything's up for grabs basically. Everybody likes Larry Sanders, but other than that, people have wanted Monte gone forever, or assuming he'll leave. And Brandon, I think now the big question is, do we really want this guy back this summer, because he really hasn't improved. And I think that's a big storyline we've seen thus far this season, the fact that Brandon Jennings has not improved. And that's really, to me, the biggest negative of the first half of the season, even if record-wise they're in an okay spot.
If you're looking for a positive...
yes, Dan. Give me a positive.
You were supposed to toss it to me, and I didn't get anything tossed to me, so I just grabbed it.
Yeah.
I'm a scoring guard. All right, I'm Monte Ellis, I'm Brandon Jennings. I'm not passing it to anybody.
Kobe assist.
Yeah. Well, if you're looking for a positive, it's Larry Sanders without a doubt. He really transformed from a defensive sort of havoc wreaker and shot blocker into a legitimate defensive anchor in the first half. which was really surprising considering after Summer League we were all like, oh my God, this guy's terrible. And so he's anchored what has been for the most part a very good Bucks defense. The only real reason that they are where they are, and also has developed a fairly reliable offensive game, which I think is kind of understated. And it's really been evident when he's been out these last couple of games that the offense has looked bad. Just because so much of it without any sort of interior presence just comes down to Ellis and Jennings chucking jumpers, and Jennings was doing all right when he was making his threes, which he's been doing reasonably well this year, but the last couple of games he just hasn't been able to do anything. But yeah, I mean the Bucks owe a lot of where they are to Larry Sanders' emergence, and he's looking, more and more, if not already, like the most indispensable player on the team, and the guy that now we're sort of thinking, is this the guy that we want to tie our hopes to? Not that he's anybody who's going to carry a franchise by himself, but he's certainly looking like a piece who could be a major part of what they're doing going forward. But we have to thank the Lord that he has become what he has, or things could be much, much worse than they are right now.
All right, Jake.
Well, I just remember the Summer League where he was falling out with 10 fouls to give, wasn't it? Like, Tobias Harris was like the next big thing. He was supposed to be the X Factor and all that other stuff. I could even take it one step further if you want to be super optimistic. And by one step further, I mean future-wise. So I know John Henson's time on the court has actually kind of dropped off over the past few months, or at least over the past month. But he even gets 15 minutes a night, and he makes at least one or two like solid NBA veteran plays. And to me, they were pretty high on him. I actually couldn't watch the draft this year because I was at the Foo Fighters concert, which makes me such a good writer. Or a good Bucks fan, just going to that instead, and I wasn't super happy about it right away, just because how many PFs they have next to players on their roster. But I think he's shown more than enough in even limited playing time to warrant serious, no trade consideration over the next couple days, if that even comes to fruition. The one thing with him though is I think he hasn't picked a hand, like a dominant hand yet. So when he goes up for like those little baby hooks and everything in the paint, you don't know if it's coming left or right, which can't necessarily be a bad thing. But he's got so much length out there that he can shoot over pretty much anybody if he wants to play that game. And, he's already shown a more polished offensive, like a shot creating part of his game has shown more than I would think even Ersan at times. Before the break, everybody kind of talked to him in the locker room before that last game and asked him about the rookie wall, and he was pretty honest that he thought he was kind of hitting not so much a wall, but he definitely felt like it was a little bit different, compared to the first 15 games of the season, which makes sense. But I'm interested whether or not they make a deal. I'm interested to see what he does in the second half and beyond, because I think he's probably, if you're going to build a future around this team, to me it's switched in 31 or 51 games or whatever. It's switched from the back court to the front court in terms of what you'd look for to build a team around for the future.
And, I've kind of listed some of my thoughts in general about how the East has turned into essentially a 9-team race for 8 spots. So I guess you'd expect the Bucks to be in the mix, and it's kind of been the idea that, it's where they want to be. They want to be in the mix, and that might tether them down a little bit in terms of their moves. But from what we've heard, they've been extremely active on the trade market. Larry Sanders is the only player that you would say shouldn't be available, and part of it's probably because we don't know what he wants on his next deal. We don't know how reasonable he's going to be in that respect, and it's not really come up, and it's not to the point where the Bucks have to decide yet. With Jennings, they do have to make a decision. But I think you can make the case that Sanders right now is probably the most reasonable player, or he's crafted the most reasonable game around his talents. I mean, focuses a lot more on defense now, and like Dan was saying, he's actually turned himself into a pretty solid offensive player by just being more reasonable about what he can do. We heard kind of over the summer and then a bit throughout the beginning of the season that he just realized, okay, I shouldn't be shooting jumpers. This is a bad idea. And he still lets a few go every once in a while, but, to get mad about maybe we've seen 10, 12 of them this year, not that bad, especially in comparison to how much time he spent anchored in the paint, which is something he talked about earlier. And it's great to see him craft a reasonable game. He's not an impact offensive player, but he's important. And now he's staying on the floor more. He's still bringing that defense. I think that's really great to see. And obviously, we kind of just gloss over the Mike Dunleavys of the world and kind of take them for granted. But he's been amazing, been an amazing signing. Anybody who's really down on John Hammond should remember that, he's the guy who brought him in on a really nice deal. And I guess we can turn our attention to John Hammond in a couple of minutes, but why don't we talk a bit about where you guys think they're going to finish in terms of seeding in the Eastern Conference? Because that's the next big question. Are they going to turn this into something, or is it going to be another one of those Bucks years where we're riding it out to the last minute to see if they're going to get pounded in the first round or not? It's going to be a late lottery or pounded in the first round. So, Frank, you've probably been through the most of these of all of us, so you get the first crack at it again.
That's Steve's way of saying I'm the oldest.
That's right. That's right. Oh, also, I didn't mention this. When Jake, when you were going through the power forward thing, and you mentioned there's PFs next to a lot of names, I was thinking, is this a good nickname for the Bucks or not? PF Bangs? Does that count for like PF for like Bango? Does that no? Thumbs down. Thumbs down. Yeah. Okay. Fine.
Oh my God.
But, well, I had to try it. I
don't think there's nearly enough banging going on. But I don't want to go.
But it's for Bango. Well, yeah, you're right. Yeah. All right.
They're not big enough to bang. I don't like where this conversation's going.
Should I bring up the William Hung video now? She banged.
Second half.
No. Getting back to your question, Steve.
I did have one. Yeah, I did have a substantive one. Sure.
Well, okay, so I'll premise this on the idea that the Bucks will not be making a, sell move at the deadline. So even if they trade Monte or Brandon or Ersan, which a month ago I would have thought was pretty unlikely, but now I'm almost to the point where I'd expect one of them to go, to be honest, just because I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into again the angst and town folk with pitchforks type talk that we've had from our readers and everybody else from the Bucks fan base out there. But I would be surprised if they dealt any of their key players without getting key guys back that could at least fill those voids. So. I'll premise this on them talent-wise, at least sort of staying around where they are. Hopefully, at the very least, moving pieces around where they're better balanced. And I'll guess that they can finish. I mean, I'm looking 7th or 8th. I mean, it's important to remember they're not. Even though they're 8th, it's such a weird year in the East. They're only 4 games back of the Nets for the 4th spot, right? The Nets, who they play the next 2 nights. So, again, do I expect them to really make a run at those spots? No, I don't, because, you got the Bulls at number 5. They're potentially getting Derrick Rose back, or maybe not. I think realistically you look at the Celtics as the team that you put your target on at the 7th spot, and you would think you'd have at least a pretty good shot at them given Rondo's out, and can they really keep up this run that they've been on, given where their talent is and their age, and all this talk about potentially moving KG and stuff like that. So I think 7 or 8 is where you'd probably look for. We don't have any real indication that Andrew Bynum's going to come back to the Sixers. The Bucks just beat the Sixers, clinched the tiebreaker with Philly, so I think obviously you feel pretty decent about a 4-game lead on them right now. But again, 30 games left in the season, a lot can happen. So I'll kind of hedge my bet and say, things might go a little bit haywire. Maybe you can't jump Boston for 7th, but you finish 8th. But I think, 7th is a very reasonable one. And that should be at a minimum what they're shooting for at this point.
Dan, what do you got for me?
Yeah, I mean, I want to say the seventh because, like Frank mentioned, I'm not real confident that the Celtics can keep up what they've been doing since Rondo went out. As hammered as they've been by injuries, we're still talking about KG and Pierce staying healthy, and if anything happens to either of them, they're in huge trouble. Plus, I personally think trading KG makes a lot of sense for the Celtics. So, who knows? I don't necessarily see him doing that, but yeah, I mean, it's so crowded in the Eastern playoff race that you wouldn't even rule out necessarily the Bucks getting kind of hot. If Jennings somehow snaps out of February or just gets out of February without doing too much damage, and goes on a nice little scoring streak, the Bucks could easily reel off 4 or 5 wins in a row and find themselves in the 6th seed all of a sudden. But their attachment to 500 is just so strong. It's hard to put them a whole lot higher than 8 or 7. So yeah, I don't know if I can reasonably say much higher than that. But I mean, it sucks because that obviously determines who you're going to play. But I don't think necessarily at the end of the year you'll be able to look at the 8th seed and say it's significantly worse than the 6th or the 5th or hell even the 4th seed potentially in the East. But that's the way it's gonna end up, and they're gonna get crushed if they wind up down there.
All right, Jake. So football, are they going to get a first-round bye and home field advantage throughout the playoffs? Road to the Super Bowl? Yeah?
The sad part about the entire Eastern Conference being kind of muddled up is that the only team that's really not beatable at all happens to be the first seed. And my guess is that the Bucks don't really move beyond the 8th seed. They have 31 games left. They have 17 of their next 31 are against teams that are currently in the playoffs in either conference. That doesn't include a couple against Dallas, a couple against Portland, and a couple of trips just out west in general. They play, I think, the majority of it might be 5 out of 7 or 6 out of 7 or some of their last, 7 games, are on the road, including one against the Thunder. So I just think like they'll probably make the 8th seed, but depending on what Boston does trading here, I would assume they wouldn't trade Kevin Garnett because does he have a no trade clause? They even include.
Yeah, he does. He has one of 4, I believe, in the league.
Yeah.
And he was pretty much like, yeah, I don't really want to go anywhere. I mean, Boston's probably Danny Ainge is probably pretty smart, so he could very well deal both of them. But my guess is that they don't move above the 8th seed just because, I would think even whatever move, like Frank said, whatever move they make, they may be getting rid of pieces, but they're bringing some sort of piece back. And to me, it's probably not going to be consistent or an electric enough fit that's going to carry them over the top to, not have to face the Heat and get slaughtered in the first round.
There's no John Salmons like superstar available in the market this year. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, it's kind of crazy because Hammond's really, really, to me, he's really good at finding like undervalued assets. Like with Mike Dunleavy, Luke Ridnour, guys like that. I don't know. I mean, if Monte Ellis is his closest, move towards like a superstar player, let's try to raise that bar a little bit because. I don't think. I mean, he's pretty good at fleecing teams out of somewhat decent talent and making them take like John Salmons and Corey Maggetti's contract. But I don't. For some reason, I don't really see that happening this time around. Just because I don't think there's enough teams that are interested in that, making that type of move. The Kings are probably not going to trade for Monte.
John Salmons might be available though. I bet you could get it.
Did you guys see the story that Kevin Pelton did for ESPN looking at the impact of sort of buyers and sellers at the deadline? I guess the upshot of it was very little bump from basically trades. Basically looked at all trade deadline deals in the last 5 years and found that I think the average buyer record-wise win percentage went up by I think 2%. Average loser about the same down. And the interesting one, of course, was that the biggest bump was for any team in that span was the John Salmons trade in Milwaukee, and we've talked about how the Fear the Deer run is really basically a 30-game phenomenon in a lot of ways. They went 22-8 to finish that season, but an interesting side note. So the Bucks at least once have hit a home run at the break, but of course the home run became something.
Then they tripped over home plate.
Didn't George Karl say that 90% of trades in the NBA are just crap for crap? Maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well,
so okay. You know what? We're all talking trades. We have Frank at a 7th or 8th seed, Dan at a 7th or 8th seed, maybe a 6th, if we can get something good going. We have Jake at an 8th seed. I think everyone pretty much knows I'm in the 7th.
Call it a 9, Steve. Call it a 9.
Man, I really want to, but, with Bynum out, Jason Richardson, and Thad Young out, I don't know. I mean, that's the rest of that roster is just
and they're saying Bynum might not come back this year.
Right.
If he doesn't come back at all, they're not moving up.
And I'm not a big believer in whatever they're doing in Toronto, if there's anything to believe in, or if that's even a thing they're doing. But they are still a team, and Terrence Ross can dunk apparently. But anyways, we have our kind of tepid predictions. They're basically going to end up right around where they are. The majority of evidence says, as Frank would suggest, that there aren't really huge, tectonic moves that you get to make at the break. They're going to change the outcome of your season by a lot. It worked with Fear the Deer, but do you buy lottery tickets twice? You just cash in all your money and go for something big. Is there a deal out there? I'll go to each of you guys again. Is there any deal out there that we've heard, or any player that's out there, or even just kind of a position group that you think they can upgrade now that's going to materially affect what they do? And I'll just give my first up front. You guys know from the beginning of the season I said, get a three-point shooter, get a three-point shooter, get a three-point shooter, get a three-point shooter. And they haven't had any three-point shooter. And, they had the Marquise Daniels blip where he shot 6 of 10 in a week or something. Everybody's all excited. And then he went back to Marquise Daniels. And he hasn't said anything on Twitter to me since, no ha messages.
Yeah, he does. He did that to me 3 times. I didn't even say anything bad about him. It was just an innocuous comment. Marquise Daniels just made a layup. And
So, Frank, I'm kicking it to you. Save the Bucks. Ready, go.
Well, I think a month ago, I would not have. I think Steve, we've discussed this on podcasts, that we were not expecting Brandon or Monte to be moved. We just thought it would be kind of, paralysis of things are going okay. Let's not make a move. We can re-sign Brandon. Monte, he'll become an expiring contract, so we'll have money to use in the summer. And I mean, there have been arguments for that. There's still arguments to sort of not do anything on some level. Not because you think that this current team is great and unassailable and, let's all be thrilled with it. But I think I've kind of turned and maybe it's sort of this knee-jerk reaction of, losing a few games when Sanders was out, which on some level is predictable. But the way that Jennings really struggled, the way that Ellis has struggled all year, there's been no mean regression in a good way in terms of his scoring efficiency. Brandon kind of went up, and now he's kind of gone back down. He's not even up to where he was last year. So I think in some ways, I called it a knee-jerk reaction to sort of say, trade all these guys, start over. But honestly, I think it's not really a knee-jerk so much to say, well, Monte Ellis wasn't efficient last year. He wasn't efficient this year. Brandon has never been efficient. He hasn't gotten any better. That's not really a knee-jerk so much as just embracing reality and saying, what do you really have with these guys, and do you really want to kind of continuously go back to this and think that you're going to get a different result? And so I think if, another 2 weeks of Brandon Jennings struggling the last, again, 6 or 7 games, if that finally gets the Bucks to embrace reality and say, you know what, whether he wants out or doesn't want out, we're going to make a deal. And, the irony of the talk about Josh Smith was that kind of got me thinking about, heck, forget Josh Smith for a minute. If the Hawks like Brandon Jennings and you could do a deal around Jeff Teague and Brandon Jennings as the Bucks fan, maybe it's grass is always greener, but wouldn't on some level you just, I don't know, I think a lot of Bucks fans at this point, and I'm leaning that way too, would just say, yeah, if we can get something in Jeff Teague for Brandon Jennings, re-sign Jeff Teague for less than whatever Brandon Jennings is going to want, and try to build a new life together after the season.
Just run away together with Jeff.
Yeah, me and Jeff Teague will, take a bunch of pots and pans loaded on a donkey and walk off into the sunset together. I don't know. So I don't know. I think that my hope is that, and I think that the activity that the Bucks have apparently had in trade talks is hopefully indicative of the team realizing that again, this team is going to need some serious makeover this summer, and there are a lot of expiring contracts, a lot of uncertainty around the main guys other than Larry Sanders, and so I would be surprised if Monte Brandon and Ersan, who I haven't mentioned, but who is arguably sort of maybe the most malleable trade asset they have, just because a lights out 3-point shooter who plays power forward and at times has rebounded will generally be useful to most teams, and he's under contract at a not totally unreasonable rate. So I think one of those guys, I don't know, I just have this feeling that one of those guys at least is going to be gone by Thursday. I'd be surprised if they didn't do anything. At a minimum, you could trade a guy like Dallenberg, even though I think a good point was made. Maybe Dallenberg's played too well now. You don't want to trade him just in case Sanders gets hurt. But I would be surprised if no moves are made. And again, I think there's a good chance it could be a big one. And maybe the Bucks find something that where they can make a big move. And I don't think it's going to be for a superstar. I don't think there are any superstars available. But I think a move could be in the right direction. A year ago, we said the Monte Ellis move was the beginning of kind of a whole new era and a different direction, and I think it's about time we see a continuous move away from what they were.
I did offer to light myself on fire twice in that trade reaction column, if I remember correctly. But still, Bogut hasn't played much. All right, Dan, so Frank is breaking up the big three. The vaunted big three.
Don't bring up big threes. People went nuts when we said that before.
So what do you have for us? Anything?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I was thinking about, I remember when the Josh Smith stuff came up, and my immediate reaction, just because I still remember his comments about Milwaukee and the seething anger that boiled up, after that,
And then he played.
was like, I don't want to go anywhere near him. But then, like, the more I thought about it, obviously the strengths of the team right now and what's going to carry them to the playoffs, assuming that they continue on their current path, is defense. And a Sanders Josh Smith front court is going to be incredible on defense. I mean, that'd be really, really good. And my big thing with the trade deadline this whole year has been, I don't really care what they do as long as it's not bringing in like a bunch of future commitments and tying themselves down to somebody who's not an obvious upgrade at some spot. As long as they maintain the flexibility, which I still think like cap flexibility going into this summer is an underrated thing for them to pursue. So maybe if it does mean trading a bunch of guys that we're not real attached to, Dallenberg, any of the three main guys, I suppose, there's no reason to think that Milwaukee's near future will be irreparably damaged getting rid of Jennings or Ellis or Ersan or anybody. But if you do all that and get a guy like Josh Smith, on an expiring contract, and there's probably less of an incentive for him to really be a troublemaker because he's playing for his next contract. Maybe that's the best idea. Maybe the idea is just to say, screw it, we're going for it this year, but not at the expense of future years. And I can't say I would be altogether upset about something like that.
All right, so far we've got Frank in general kind of targeting, I guess what you'd call an undervalued asset maybe with a Jeff Teague. Somebody's going to come out maybe on a next deal, on a reasonable deal. Dan more willing to take a gamble on a guy who's overpaid, but his deal is coming up. Doesn't have a lot of long-term paper. I guess possibly you could think about re-signing him, but I know the flexibility angle I like. And Jake, will look to you to break the tie.
Can I do both?
Yes.
I just don't want him to be the Raptors.
Yes.
That's the big issue. You don't trade for a guy that's signed for like 4 or 5 years. Sorry, I just got brought dinner. You don't trade for a guy that's going to cost you more like 3 or 4 years down the road, just because you think that he's a big name or something like that. Like Dan kind of touched on it. I'd be fine with letting almost any of these guys go, because even last year, if you would have said before last year's trading deadline that Brandon Jennings would be expendable at this point this year, I mean, how many people probably would have had some sort of a gassed reaction to it? Only from the standpoint that he was considered, still under not achieving his potential. At this point, we've seen enough of him where I just feel like he is what he is. And that's kind of where I'm at with most of the team, most of the players on the team, with the exception of probably Larry, John, and Tobias, and maybe Doran Lamb because he never plays. Plays in the D-League a lot. But, I mean, I'm almost at the point where you kind of know what every single player on the team is, except for like 2 or 3 guys. And what all of them are makes them expendable, because it's not good enough to carry the team beyond an 8th or 7th or maybe 6th seed or something like that. Like what's your ultimate goal here in the next 2 or 3 years?
Right.
As long as they're shedding salary or taking on salary for 2 more years or a year or something like that, I'm okay with that. But if it's something like the Rudy Gay deal, or they're bringing in somebody that they're going to sign for an extended contract. I mean, even that JJ Redick thing that was going around, I'd actually be okay with it, because I think he's a pretty solid player. But I mean, how much are you expecting to pay for that guy going forward, and how much is it going to screw up your ability to, retain Larry Sanders in 2 years? Especially if you don't know if Jennings is going to be here or Ellis is going to be here, stuff like that. That's not really a tiebreaker, but it's there.
Well, I mean, what's a Bucks talk without, a kind of indefinitive answer that, goes off into space, and we're all left going, something's going on? So, I mean, I guess, I think we all get the feeling that people who watch the team for a long time aren't going to be swayed in terms of what they think about the team with any 5-game stretch, any 8-game stretch, any 10-game stretch. We kind of have a grapple on where this team can wind up. And we talked about it earlier. Maybe the 6th seed, probably 7th or 8th seed. Got a lot of money coming off the books in the summer. Do they just preserve that? Do they go get somebody very soon? We don't know. We will know very soon. February 21st by 2 p.m. we're going to know essentially whether they've decided to change course, or whether they think that the off season, when some of these contracts come off the book, is kind of a change of course in its own right. So we'll see that in the very near future. Hope you enjoyed the talk. We'll do more if you like them. We'll do less if you don't. Everybody, say bye to all the lovely people out there.
Bye, Milwaukee.
On Thursday, the entire world explodes on the internet.
Peace.